Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Thursday's edition of Where All the Ladies At. I am Kim, I'm your host. I am a history nerd, a archaeology groupie, and a novelist on the side. No, really, novelist is the main thing. Anyways, this is Where All the Ladies At. It's a podcast where I dive deep into history, myth, and legend and try to figure out where all the ladies went, because for being half the population, we didn't get our names in the history books a lot. And if we did, they were not great. It was not a big name or not a lot of entry. We were always tend to play the second fiddle a lot. And that's not cool, because we did some really amazing things, us ladies out there. So I thought I would start a podcast where I focus only on the ladies in history. And the only time guys are mentioned, let me fix that, is out of, they're the second fiddle. They're the second fiddle in these stories. Always. So I do 2 episodes a week. Monday is Myth and Legend. So if you haven't seen that, go back and check it out. And Thursdays are history. This month I have been focused on Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, focusing a lot on the Asian aspect, but really trying to dive into some places that maybe we don't tend to go too much. However, today's episode, we're going to Japan. So I know Japan is visited a lot, but I think that this amazing woman doesn't get as much play here in in the world. So that's pretty cool. Before we jump into her, though, let's do a little housekeeping and shameless plugging. If you want to reach out to me, you definitely can do that. I have Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you don't do social, I also have an email, so check it out. If you want to support the podcast, like, comment, share, follow, subscribe, do all those amazing things. The more you engage with the video or audio, the more the algorithms of those platforms, i.e. YouTube and Spotify, feel that people want to listen to me, and so they think, oh, if a couple people want to listen and a couple people like it, maybe more people like it, and we'll push out and we'll be able to build a really cool community that shares and celebrates these ladies. If you want to kick a little cash my way, you can do that as well. I have a Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon, so check those out. If you want more on this and so much more, make sure you check out my Medium publication. And if you're into magical, mystical, spiritual, wellness, holistic healing, all that kind of stuff, make sure you check out my other podcast. It's called Our Mystic Road Trip. My brain froze for a second, guys. It's called Our Mystic Road Trip. And I think that's it for the shameless plugging and housekeeping. So let's go ahead and get started. With the lady that we're going to be talking about today. Now, we're going to be covering, her name is, I want to pronounce it right, Murasaki Shikibu. I think that's how you pronounce it. And she is a woman who wrote the first novel. Now, we've talked about the first woman author, but this is the first person, give or take, that wrote a novel, right? And she is, as I said, sorry guys, from Japan. So before we jump into all that, all her life and the drama and all that good stuff, I think we really need to understand where she came from and what it was like for women. Once again, I always say this, the reason I do this is because I do feel that understanding the environment and the challenges that she had to overcome will allow you to really get to know her a little bit better and really shine a light on how much she actually had to overcome. So let's get started. So if we're talking about when she was around, when she grew up, that would be Japan in the Heian, we'll say Heian period. This is basically the late 900s in Japan, right? We're gonna go into Heian, and that is the city that was the main city there. It's what we now call Kyoto, right? The streets were pretty quiet. They were lined with wooden villas and winding gardens. You can still see some of the more traditional houses there if you go there. Courtiers were gliding by in junihito, I think that's how you say it, which are the 12-layered silk cloth robes that trail behind them, all the ones that we usually see, right? There's also incense in the air. There's moon viewing parties on the calendar. You know, entire relationships are seen by poems. So basically, we're in the thick of the Heian period, right? This is Japan's cultural golden age. It lasted from about 794 to, I want to make sure I get the 1185. But in this particular moment, right around the time Murasaki was born, it was at its peak elegance. You know, it was peak elegance. There was a lot of political drama on it. It was kind of like Versailles put into a Buddhist monastery. This is kind of what I envision, right? So society was ruled by aristocracy, in particular the Fujiwara clan. And they basically ran the country by marrying their daughters off to emperors and then pulling strings behind the curtains, right? If you weren't born into the elite, your voice really didn't have much say in anything. But if you were aristocracy, man, your life was like perfect, right? You had status, you had symbolism, you had aesthetic competitions. All these things were going around in that world. The idea would be you just didn't show up to court, right? You had to win it. You had to win it. And while all the opulence makes the Heian court pretty dreamy and poetic and all this stuff, do not get it twisted, okay? This world there were strict social codes, there were gender roles, there were hierarchical power games. Like, it was beautiful to look at, but it was very unequal when it came to power, right? For men, life pretty much revolved around politics and power and philosophic posturing, right? In Chinese, because that was the language of law, right? Confucian doctrine and court records. For women, it was a little bit more complicated. So let's talk about that. Heian aristocratic women lived lives with a lot of restrictions, right? But they had influence. It's kind of this weird paradox, right? They couldn't hold political office. They didn't participate in official rituals of state, and they were not really to be seen, right? Most elite women were hidden from public view, like physically, not like they just weren't seen. Like, they were literally just not seen. They were hidden. They communicated from behind blinds, curtains, screen doors, fans, right? Pretty much ghosts in silk. But these women became the literary heartbeat of the time. And how did that happen? Because while the men were kind of busy with Chinese classics and government intrigue, right, women were kind of building an entire parallel world in the Japanese script called kana, right? And this was created specifically for expressing things the Chinese language didn't quite capture: emotion, intimacy, subtlety, shade. They wrote diaries and essays and poems and all these things that outlived men's official records, right? Their voices, they were filtered through wit and melancholy, and that kind of shaped how we understand the Heian culture today, right? Education, though, wasn't guaranteed. Girls only learned what their families allowed. So for most, reading and writing were kind of luxury skills. If you were lucky and born into a family that kind of saw value in a clever daughter, you might be taught how to read kana, compose poetry, play an instrument, right? Now, Chinese, on the other hand, that was off limits. That was serious stuff. Men only spoke it. But then, here comes Murasaki Shikibu. And so now we have an idea of what it was like in the Heian, what was going on, what women really were in this period. We can actually jump into the woman herself, right? So she was born in 978 into the Fujiwara clan. Yes, the same Fujiwara I mentioned before, right? That basically, this family turned Heian Japan into a family-run political drama, right? Her branch of family was top-tier elite, of course, but they were still part of the scholarly aristocracy. So her father, Fujiwara no Tamitoki, I think that's how you say it, was a provincial governor, right? And he was pretty well educated. He was really well known for that, right? And luckily for Murasaki, he didn't hide the books, right? She grew up pretty much surrounded by all types of literature, Buddhist texts, Chinese classics, poetry. Most of the girls were being taught how to write a perfectly wistful love poem or master the koto. Murasaki was absorbing Chinese literature, and that was the language of the government, right? Intellect and masculine prestige. So it was a language that was really not, as I said before, really not meant for the ladies. Now, hold on, I think I'm gonna sneeze. No, okay, so her father supposedly kind of once said, this is kind of just conjecture, she should have been born a boy, which I think he thought was a compliment, but it wasn't really warm and fuzzy. But it did lend itself to show that he could see she had a pretty good intellect, right? Now, here's where it kind of gets a little, we don't actually know her real name, right? Likely, like many other women in the Heian period, her birth name was never recorded. Instead, the name Murasaki really comes from the character of the Tales of Genji. So Prince Genji's soulmate, his ideal woman, is Shikibu, comes from her father's job title, right? So, and then Shikibu, comes from her father's job title in the Ministry of Ceremonial Affairs. So her name basically means Mrs. Genji's soulmate from HR kind of idea, right? She married later than most women of her time, around age 27, which was really unheard of in society. Most often there was teenage marriages at this time, and that was really the normal when it came to noblewomen. She gave birth to a daughter, but 2 years in, her husband died, and she was a widowed single mother in her 30s. That doesn't sound like great, it's not great. It's hard now, but back in Heian times, that was a social cliff. She was standing on the cliff, right? Instead, though, of doing what a lot of women would have done at the time and kind of retreating into quiet mourning or settling into the sidelines, she did the literary equivalent of kicking the screen door in, right? She was so cool. So she was invited to court as a lady in waiting to Empress Soshi, and that was one of the most beautiful women in the land. And thanks again to the Fujiwara family politics, Soshi's father, Fujiwara no Michinaga, I think I said that right, was kind of like the puppet master of the whole empire. And he was building this cultural dream team to surround his daughter with the best female writers of the era. And Murasaki was brought in not just for company, but for the talent. She arrived at CARP. She was sharp, she widowed, she watched everything, and she really started writing something that would change literature forever. So this book really broke the mold. It rewrote the rules, right? The Tale of Genji was written around the year 1000. So it's often called the world's first novel, but it's not really like this old historical artifact. It's pretty awesome. It wasn't a religious scripture, which was very popular at this time. It wasn't another poetry collection, which was the other option. It was really this sprawling, deeply human story that followed the life of Hikaru Genji. That's the Shining Prince. He's kind of this heartthrob nobleman, right? He had some mother issues, as many men do. He had a complicated love life, and a little bit of an existential streak, right? So Genji wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was charming, he was cultured, he was emotionally intelligent, and a walking disaster, right? So the genius of this was that Murasaki didn't just give us a plot, right? She gave us interiority, right? Characters in Genji don't just do things. They feel things. They fall in love. They obsess over small slights. They spiral into depression. They dream about ghosts, right? They suffer deeply from the consequences of their own choices. And it was probably maybe even like the first psychological realism. And that was centuries before Freud or, everything, but definitely some psychological realism. And remember, she was doing this in Kana, the women's writing. So the men of her time were writing in Chinese, clinging to Confucian ideas and bureaucratic formality and all that. But Murasaki was like, I'll use the less serious script to build an emotionally rich and very ambitious epic that really outlived a lot of other things. You know, you have to think about it. This wasn't just a woman writing a story, right? This was a woman creating a new literary consciousness, right? She was told she had to stay behind the curtain and speak only when spoken to. And the book, it had everything in it: forbidden romances, courtly rivalries, poetic flirtations, grief, loss, spiritual searching, even a little bit of a vengeful ghost or two. Because, you know, you have to have a little dramatic sin, right? And a society that really tried to restrict her to the soft power and quiet influence, Murasaki wrote a book that really echoes across centuries, right? She wasn't writing in a woman's voice. She made the voice central. She made it canon, right? She, you know, the Tale of Genji just didn't sit on dusty scrolls in someone's lacquer box. It was hand copied, shared, and devoured by the aristocracy. A noblewoman read it in their private quarters. They whispered about Genji's lovers, right? And this was long before the printing press. So every single copy, as I said, had to be handwritten. So if your story is getting copied that often, basically that was like the Heian form of trending, right? So it just goes to show, like, people studied it. Members of the court admired her style, right? They envied her insight. And because of this, Murasaki was writing from inside the palace itself, you know, and that she had access to all these kind of things, right? Her fictionalized version of the court became a kind of mirror. So it was kind of like almost like a hands-on approach, right? Because of this also made her legacy more than just the literary, right? She documented court life down to the perfume blending, the seasonal color themes in fashion, unspoken rules of flirtation and poetry, right? This book and her writing wasn't just storytelling. It was kind of a helpful tool for anthropologists, you know, and that is amazing. It kind of gave a kind of emotional and cultural self-awareness, which is kind of cool. And the fact she did this all as a woman, writing in Kana, in a court where most male scholars still turn their noses up at women writing, right? That was revolutionary. She kind of proved that stories told in a woman's voice weren't trivial, right? They were essential, they were deep, they were complex, they were capable of reshaping culture. And by the time Murasaki stepped away from court life, quietly, as with style, the tale of Genji had already become a legend, right? She wasn't trying to be the voice of her generation. She just was. And what's even more amazing is she did it while dodging court politics, grieving her husband, raising a daughter, and side-eyeing the very world she was helping immortalize, right? That's a pretty big legacy. I think the takeaway we can take from this is that she really lived in a time when women were expected to stay silent and ornamental. But instead, she chose to pick up her brush and kind of rewrite her narrative. And she made history doing so, you know. So that's it for Murasaki Shikibu. And I hope you enjoyed learning about her. There's so much. I highly suggest if you can go out there and read The Tale of Genji, go do it. It's pretty cool. I haven't read it all yet, but I'm working on it. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the world's first novel, or allegedly the world's first novel. You never know, right? Something may pop up later. And I hope you loved learning about Murasaki Shikibu. If you did, make sure you check out more about her. There's a lot more out there to it. As always, guys, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to reach out to me, you know you can do that through my social media or the email. If you want to support the podcast, like, comment, share, follow, subscribe, please and thank you. And if you want to kick cash my way, there's ways to do that as well. If you want information on this and other females and other topics related to women in history, check out my Medium publication. And if you're into magical, mystical, spiritual, holistic wellness, holistic diet, all that kind of stuff, make sure you check out my other podcast. It's called Our Mystic Road Trip. I'd love to see you over there as well. And until next time, guys, as always, stay curious, stay safe, stay blessed.